off, Welsh word like V and Ed often go unpronounced. Ed is more deleted occasionally as opposed to the frequency that V is, and also K is deleted, but only in one word so far. So for example, Vav, which means fine, is often pronounced as but. And Hav, as summer, can sometimes be pronounced ha, depends on the dialect. So my big picture question when I began looking at this is what motivates this disappearance of V in the word final position? So to start off, the Welsh grammarian Morris Jones has looked at this historically, and he says that V loss is a long, ongoing process. And it's been recorded in Bard's and Floyd's works since about 1100. And it first began, as he claims, after the diphthong owl. Otherwise, it's been rather sporadic. However, there is one word in Welsh which does end this owl with the V on the end, and that is prowl, which means test or exam, but it only exists because it is a back formation. So it came into the language much later. So here's a small table of early deletion. So we can see he has become he, which means old. Shao has become shao, hand, and pao has become pao, spade. So because my talk is about gravity, gravity as a feature is purely phonetic and occurs on sounds which are equal to or less than 2.5 kilohertz. It also occurs in the peripheral areas of the oral cavity, so your velars, your labials, uvulars, and other throaty sounds. And is acoustically low, and it can make sounds less salient or echo. So my research questions are, does grave influence final V loss in Welsh? And could it also influence the occasional loss of A? And do Flynn and Philop's analysis of gravity as purely phonetic apply to Welsh, or is there more detail going on? And also, is this final V deletion, since we know it began on the owl, according to Morris Jones, is it lexically diffused across the language? So with these questions in mind, I began to examine this loss through collecting data from the Welsh Dialect Survey, which has many speakers' pronunciations across many different dialects in Wales. There are hundreds of entries of different words and phrases, and it was taken over the course of 7 years, so from 1993 until 2000. I also began to investigate Welsh media, such as YouTube videos, because they're a bit more candid, and they express more natural speech. Or even in scripts, it's fine, because people still delete their V's. And these come from various dialects, but mostly the standard, which is imperative. So, my first set of data is this table, which is sadly getting cut off. So as we can see, we have words deleting at different rates. There's Guadalcanal, which means July, which is only deleting at a small 6% according to the Welsh Dialect Survey. And then the last one, which sadly we can't read that well, is Wetha. It's deleting at around 99%, and it means worse. And so it often gets pronounced as Wetha instead of Wetha. A better example that's more visible is Diwetha, which means last, which is deleting at also a very high rate. So we can see this rate of deletion is kind of staggered. So I have a video clip here which includes audio, and what we're going to pay attention to is this loss of V in the word Günther, which means first.
Mae'r arbrawf gyntaf yn bwysig iawn.
So this is what was said. The first impression is really important. So since we know where this V is being deleted, let's listen to it again and see if we can pick it up.
Mae'r arbrawf gyntaf yn bwysig iawn.
Were you able to hear the gynta instead of gynta? Do you want to hear it one more time? Sure. Okay.
Mae'r arbrawf gyntaf yn bwysig iawn.
Yeah. So the V is just not there for this speaker. And this is a series about how to begin Welsh conversations. So as I said, the first impression is very important. So it's kind of an introductory conversation. So my next example features maybe loss in the word catre, which means home.
Dangoswch eich bod wedi gwneud eich gwaith cartre.
So it's a very long example, but what we're paying attention to is the very end word, so it's a bit easier. So it says, show that you've done your homework, and that one's a harder one to pronounce, so I'll try my best. Mamusa eich bod wedi gwneud eich gwaith cartre. So listen to the very end part one more time.
Dangoswch eich bod wedi gwneud eich gwaith cartre.
So cartre instead of cartre. And I have one last listening example right now, and we will see muya turning to muya, which means most, and an interesting one involving edlogs. So grai going to grai. Now the muya one is going to be really hard to hear, so I'm just going to focus on the last one. And the last one is going to occur at the very end of the sound, at the very end of the utterance.
Yna bydd y llwybr mwyaf cyflym ac union i'r fan rydych am gyrraedd. Bydd
Okay, it's kind of long, sorry about that. So here's the transcription. It's kind of a long one. So ar I llwybr mwyaf cyflym ac union i'r fan rydych am gyrraedd. So along the quickest route and exactly to the place you want for a logo. So pay attention to the very end part and see if you can hear the end block.
Yna bydd y llwybr mwyaf cyflym ac union i'r fan rydych am gyrraedd. Bydd
So I'm good at it before he begins talking about the other thing, which I forget what it is. So those are some examples of audio. We also have a difference in coda. So if the coda is complex versus simple, and what happens with deletion. So in a word like bar, which means beer, the complex coda is not allowing this deletion of the V. Same with gner, which means to mold. Now when we look at a simple coda, which is just V as the coda, we see bra and tre, which mean fine and town, and the V is deleted. And then for eds, we have baid, which can be baid or baid, and for, which can be for or for. And so these are only deleted some of the time. Ed deletion is not occurring anywhere near as prevalent as the V deletion is. So in complex codas, there's no result of V deletion, but there is possible ed deletion. So looking at lexical gender, because the Welsh Dialect Survey has many different entries, and Welsh is a gender-based language, we have the word cryf and cref, which are variations of the adjective strong. So cryf is masculine, and it's deleted at 38%, while cref is feminine and deleted, the V is deleted at 32%. So this isn't a large margin. The masculine is slightly higher in its deletion of V, while the feminine is slightly lower, but this could have some implications. So when we look at plural formation, there are numerous affixes to form a plural in Welsh. There's a, oed, iad, ed, and eint, just to name a few. So the interesting aspect of this is when we have a noun with V deletion, even though we have the affix, we're bringing back the V. So these seem to be underlying. So you have gea, And even if a person's dialect keeps the V in Gea, so if they say Gea, then of course they're going to say Geama. But if they don't keep the V when they say Gea, they're still going to say Geama. In the same way as the other examples, Pri, Prive, Vol, Vovait. We also see reinstitution, reinstatement before adjective affixes. So there are three adjective affixes involved. There's ed, the equitive, so something has something. A, imperative, and av, which is often said as a, and that's the superlative. So here's an example with pri, which is often pronounced like pri by many speakers. And that is just your plain adjective, strong. And then when we add the affix ed, ach, or a, it becomes krived, krivach, krivach. So the V is still underlined. I also was looking at the lexical differences. And so, unfortunately, the last bit got chopped off again, so apologies. So in the first example, Guadalcanal, July, it's a high frequency word, it's a noun, but it's only deleted at 6%. If we look at the second to last example, Duetal, which means last, it's a high frequency word, adjective, and it's deleted at a very high rate of 97%. So what I can see, or what we can see from this table, is that adjectives and adverbs have higher rates of deletion than nouns do. Nouns are more staggered in their deletion rate. However, medium and low frequency words seem to be deleted less, of course, as would be expected, but we have this interesting high rate of deletion with words like guardanap and prepared. So V is deleted more in adjectives and adverbs. It's deleted more in frequently used words so far, and it's not deleted in what I believe is proper nouns, or not deleted often at least. So an example is from the University of Wales Trinity St. David database. And here we have Guadalcanal, July, and if we listen to it,
Gorffennaf.
she's saying the V at the very end. Guadalcanal.
Gorffennaf.
However, even though this is only 30% deletion of V in comparative, which means October, this is what she says.
Hydre.
She's not saying the V at all. So maybe it's just her dialect for this one, but I found this example to be pretty interesting, especially because they come from the University of Wales St. David.
Hydre.
So, you're probably all asking, why gravity? Well, only V and ed are known to delete word finally in Welsh. There is the exception of ch in the word fue. So I began to wonder, all right, what do all of these sounds or phones have in common? So they're all continuant, but so are many other sounds in Welsh. So I still need to narrow it down. Then I began to look at gravity. I'm like, okay, well, these are all grave, but so are those. However, H never occurs word finally, so I can eliminate it from my group of sounds that I have to worry about. And ch has partial deletion, and it's only known in one word, so it might just be a fluke for that one. So the only thing that sets apart V and ed from F and theta are the voice feature. So gravity is a low acoustic sound already, but if you add in voice, the acoustics seem to be even lower. And thus my analysis is that deletion by gravity, or grave, must work alongside voice in Welsh. And G and ed are the only voice preferences. So gravity is a phonological feature. Typically, it's a phonetic feature. So the data shows that gravity, or V deletion rather, occurs at different rates in different words. It occurs differently across word classes. So as you saw earlier, Nouns delete much less often than adverbs and adjectives. There is a possible distinction between lexical and gender. It still needs more analysis. However, the 38% male deletion of V versus 32% in female nouns could implicate something, which is what I said earlier. And the V's deletion is reversed when there's affixation. So gravity in V deletion may not just be wholly phonetic, and why is because V seems to have an underlying presence in words, as we saw with the morphological aspects when affixation came into play. So my conclusion is that in Welsh, gravity, with voicing as a secondary feature, participates in this final V deletion. This gravity, V loss, is historical and ongoing process. And contrary to the analysis of Benjamin, gravity has morphological implications, at least in Welsh, on stems and affixes, and it also has lexical implications on category and possibly language. So gravity in Welsh is more than just phonetic, it is also phonological, in my opinion, or conclusion. So the future directions that I would like to take this research in are in complex codas, V has two variations, other than staying V. So there's metathesis. So bar in many speakers' dialects would become baba. And relation to ev. So bar in many speakers' dialects would turn to bar. So Fenwick will consider that ev to V is a unidirectional relation. However, some speakers have this V to ev. And the reason I call this lenition instead of fortition is the fact that in a complex coda, ev can be deleted while V has not been deleted. So this has very interesting phonological and phonetic implications to me. And I would like to explore lexical gender and gravity-based deletion a little more. Thank you.
So I haven't looked at this in Welsh at all, but Irish shows seemingly a bidirectional pattern where after oo vowels we have delenition to a v in some dialects, and after ah vowels we get lenition to a nothing or a long vowel preceding. Is it also the case in Welsh, like in Irish, that historically that the was derived from a lenition from lost final vowels or something like that?
If I remember correctly, I believe the was lenited from
Right, and it would have had some conditioning environment that has since been lost. So could some of your alternations be further lenition while some of them are like, I don't know if I want to call it fortition, but delenition due to the lack of environment?
Actually, I think so. So, in the complex coda examples, V has those two variations, and it will stay V. And sometimes, though, when it stays V, it's very laxly pronounced. So instead of bada, it would be just like lightly there. And I think that that's a case of that. I think that's fun.
Thank you. It'd be great to present this at the Celtic Linguistics Conference. It would be really appreciated. How many of those cases of V going to ev do you have? It's very exciting.
So the Welsh dialect survey had a few examples of it, and it depended on the dialect in which people would do it. So it only occurred in the consonant cluster codas, and I want to say I had 10 different words, anywhere from 7 to 10 different words. And so each entry of the Welsh dialect survey would have anywhere from about 100 to 110 tokens from different speakers.
I'm a little bit curious about that because that process happens in English and some varieties of British English too. So, I don't know much about the Welsh dialect survey, but I assume many Welsh speakers are English speakers as well. Yeah. So,
I think it's completely valuable.
yeah. So, do you know which dialects were doing that more often than others? And
Don't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to look again. So one of the future sessions I would like to look at is focusing specifically on certain dialects. So there is a big split in northern and southern speakers. So my ancestors come from Caernarfon, which is up in the north. And so, for example, in the south, if they want to say milk, they say Schleif. But in the north, if they want to say milk, they say Chevry. So because there's at least lexical examples that are different and pronunciation different, I would like to look at that. Is that your question?
well, I mean, by poking around through the dialects, you might find if there's a connection to the British dialects to do the same thing. Was what I was thinking. But yeah.
That's a good way to look at it, actually.
Speaking of English, so this happens in Black English in the States too, those two. And also, just in regular English has a very restricted context that there's no word for deletion, like give me that or leave me alone. That Ed participates a little bit in that too. So like it's kind of rare, but like with that word kind of goes. Yeah, but they seem to be targeted together in some English dialects. And again, it's very morphologically conditional or syntactically conditional. In this case, only when there's an object and credit or something like that.
I think Scotland Morris Jones, at least in Welsh, considered Ed to be what he called unique lax pair. And I think people are catching on to the fact that these two sounds have some sort of relation. I think it's gravity. I think a little more needs to be looked at to see exactly how they're related, other than that. Yes.
I'm just wondering why you conclude that it's a historical process.
I conclude it's a historical process simply going from Morris Jones' analysis that when he looked at, bards and poets' works from 1300s, 1100s, all that way back then, he said he was recording the evolution back then. So that's why I'm thinking it's a historical process. Also, we're seeing a variation in dialect on how many, well, not how many people, but how prevalent is the evolution in certain words. So I think it's definitely historical in that sense.
This is my own ignorance of what gravity is, but why would just one vowel influence this? Or did you find this before other high vowels or something like that? It seems to be after the ah vowel, right? Or the odd vowels.
The ah with V is the most common occurring. However, as we saw in my examples, there are ed due deletions or e deletions.
Right.
Welsh doesn't typically have UV endings, so I can't really count those. I think there'd be like 3 words at most, which don't have them.
A degree of low frequency.
Yes. And OV is also in the lower categories. Today, if you
That needs to have one.
I've seen no evidence for that.
It's one way in the opposite direction when I was in Irish is Indy
If that's the case in Irish, I mean, Irish and Welsh are still very different languages. So it would be interesting to look at. But my hypothesis so far is that if you did not have a V, I'll look into it. Okay. Thank you so much.